like you to take a look at this picture. It's a family, 2 teenage kids and a father. It's not too different from my own family, and as I imagine a lot of your families. But the difference between my family and this family is that this family was once a family of 10. But a missile took out 7 members of the family all at once. This is a family of Syrian refugees, and this is the reality for many refugees around the world. I believe that the United States has an obligation to accept as many Syrian refugees as we can, because Syria is an unsafe region to occupy. Refugee camps abroad are overcrowded and short-term solutions, and because it is the morally right choice to make. Before we can discuss the refugees, we must know the circumstances they come from. Syria has become an impossibly dangerous place. As suggested by a 2015 article from the Wall Street Journal, problems first began with the Arab Spring uprising in 2011. The Arab Spring was a series of pro-democracy uprisings that swept the Middle East. When the movement came to Syria, it brought general unhappiness with the current regime, and protests swept the nation. These people demanded the resignation of Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, who issued crackdowns as a result of the protests. This led to numerous government-supporting groups fighting with numerous rebel groups and the outbreak of civil war in 2012. The problem was that none of these armed groups were strong enough to take control of the region for a long period of time. So by 2014, the region is very unstable and weak. And this, according to the BBC in an article updated in 2016, set the stage perfectly for the entrance of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, a terror group well known for its gruesome, malicious acts of hatred and intolerance. Ultimately, moderate protesters were replaced by extremists and jihadists, leading to an extremely dangerous, volatile situation for ordinary citizens. So the obvious choice for many faced with such destruction is to go elsewhere. The official UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, states that as of March 3, 2016, there were 4,815,360 registered Syrian refugees. This does not include the thousands traveling illegally or not seeking asylum. The UNHCR notes that these are the places that most of these refugees have ended up. Note that 4 million of them are in countries bordering Syria and in the immediate region. And the UNHCR notes that these are developing countries. They don't necessarily have the infrastructure to support 4 million additional refugees. A 2014 documentary called Learning to Swim also notes that these refugee camps are in these countries where there are 4 million other refugees are extremely overcrowded. This is Shatari refugee camp in Jordan. It holds over 100,000 people, and it was only originally meant for 60,000. In fact, it is the 9th largest city in Jordan, and it's all within a 5-mile radius. So you have people in tents living on top of other people. It's very crowded, it's very dirty, it's very unsafe. Another 2014 documentary called The Requiem for Syrian Refugees showcases refugees living in a camp such as this one. And one of them remarks that they told us this was temporary, but we've been trapped here waiting for 2 years. There is no future for us here. Since these countries that they're in have little to no infrastructure to support such large refugee populations, these refugees aren't allowed to leave the camp. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to go to school. So they're stuck there, waiting until the UN comes up with a solution for them. So millions have fled their homes in Syria only to end up in refugee camps, where they must live like sardines and wait for the realization of an uncertain future, which may not even be any better than the place that they left. Therefore, as a nation that values human rights, the United States must accept Syrian refugees to secure for them better lives free of the horrors of the places that they have endured. As citizens of the U.S., we have a constitution to protect us from a dictatorial regime. We have laws to protect our dignities and rights. The Syrian people had neither of these things. These people have been subject to unspeakable horrors. A 2013 CNN article recalls the investigation and conviction of the Syrian regime, so the government, Bashar al-Assad, by the UN for their use of chemical weapons, specifically a nerve agent known as sarin gas, against its own people. These people have also experienced things that no one should ever have to. The father I showed you in the first picture, in a 2015 interview conducted by Brandon Stanton, he recalls, "It was a government anti-personnel missile. If it had exploded, I wouldn't have any children left. But it only destroyed the top floor where my wife and daughter were. 16 people died in the attack, and 7 were from my family." Tragically, this story is not unique. There are millions of other Syrian families who have experienced the same heartbreak. Earlier, I mentioned the living conditions of these families. Their camps are too small to accommodate so many, and they're unable to leave to work, so they're sitting there waiting. What was meant to be a temporary transition point is now a permanent solution. Because these people have suffered such injustices, I believe it is a moral obligation of the United States to intervene and prevent further harm by welcoming as many refugees as we can. However, not everyone agrees with me on this position. In a 2016 Congressional Digest article, Congressman Doug Collins mentions his concerns that in welcoming refugees to the U.S., we would be inadvertently welcoming terrorists. And this is a fear which many Americans have. However, this fear is misplaced. According to a 2015 document released by the White House, refugees are subject to the highest level of security checks of any group traveling to the U.S. So some highlights of the refugee vetting process. There are 9 different checkpoints that potential refugees must pass through, from background checks to interviews to health checks, and more than 10 government agencies are concerned with these checks. Additionally, non-government agencies are also involved. From there, biometrics and fingerprints are collected and screened 4 times by 4 different agencies. And in addition to all this, there are constant and ongoing security screenings at each checkpoint to ensure nothing new has happened to the candidates. All in all, it's about a 2-year process, and less than 1% of all applicants are accepted. So this shows me that the government is really concerned about the safety of American citizens. Veronique de Rougy's 2016 article also notes that no act of terrorism has been committed in the last 40 years by a refugee to the United States. We're not welcoming terrorists as many fear. Actually, the inverse might be true. By not welcoming Syrian refugees, we might actually be creating terrorists. The above article also notes that not welcoming refugees might create hostilities in the region and leave desperate families with nowhere to turn but ISIS. So what can you do to help refugees? Adam's speech in the last round mentioned that, or drew attention to the fact that many of you have social media. You can tweet at or use this hashtag on Facebook and tweet it messages to your local representatives and to larger political figures to show your support for Syrian refugees. You can also vote for candidates who support welcoming refugees. In conclusion, the United States should accept as many Syrian refugees as is prudent. They've been the victims of horrific violence, and they're coming from the most dangerous region in the world. They've seen their families torn apart before their very eyes, and they've left everything behind to find a better future, one that doesn't exist behind the chain link fence of a refugee camp. Ultimately, given the U.S.'s position as a world leader, what does it say about us if we are unwilling to allow the utterly destitute refuge in our country? I don't think it sends the right message to the world. Instead of looking at this picture and seeing strangers, I challenge you to see yourself and your family. What if it were your future on the line?